o'clock, so I may hop off a little early.
Good evening, everyone.
Good day.
Hello, good evening.
Good evening.
Good evening.
All right. We do have a quorum. Whoever. All right. So we do have a quorum. Just on you all whenever you're ready to get started, or if you like to wait a little bit longer.
Let's just give them a few more minutes.
Okay. We're already live on YouTube as well.
Thank you. How you doing, Mr. Chairman?
I'm well. How are you? Long time no speak.
Incredible, I know.
I hope you all are doing well today.
Oh, yeah.
Yes, thank you.
I'm not sure if you all are following the stimulus talks, but it's looking dimmer and dimmer.
Yep, today was the day.
Yeah. It'll happen. Maybe not today.
Councilman Gregory, what if the city gave out a stimulus package?
Wouldn't that be great?
People out there.
Don't get us started, please.
City needs a stimulus.
Amber, is my connection all right?
I can hear you.
Okay. I keep getting a buffering on my computer here. We could start at any point if you all want. You want to wait for a few more minutes, Councilman Gregory?
You can call it to order, Mr. Chairman.
All right. I'd like to go ahead and call our October 20th commission meeting to order. Do I need a second?
You don't need it.
Okay. So with that, I know Amber and I spoke a little bit earlier. Amber's just coming off of a respite for a week. If you need me to handle it, or if you want, can you show the agenda through your screen? Can you share a screen?
Darren, you're a busy man, Darren.
You when I grow up one day.
You're busy. Keep it up, though.
Mm-hmm.
And while Amber's looking for that, we could, if you want to just take a moment of silence and quiet contemplation for about 20 or 30 seconds before we get started. All right. Any luck, Amber?
I have it. Give me
Hey, Mayor Tech.
Hey, everybody. Good evening.
Good evening to you.
How are you?
Good. We're
Blessed. It felt a little bit like a long day in only Tuesday, but it seems like a long week already. But all's good. All's good. Thank y'all for your service. I appreciate it.
Better you than me, Mayor.
I did, I know you have a report, hopefully, on economic empowerment. I did have a meeting with folks from the Chamber of Commerce today who said that they had a very meaningful 3-day series of meetings, I guess it was, about inclusion and equity last week and economic empowerment. I don't know if anybody here participated in their meetings, but I commented right away that we need to get together with them because it sounded like they were really on the right track. They were heading in the right direction.
Well, Mayor, I mean, one of the things that Amber has been insisting that we do is to make sure that we're all speaking the same language.
Right.
Start with. And, you know, that's why the equity and inclusion training that we'd like to put on would help us go a long ways. And I do think that the cost was what, around $6,000 for that, Amber?
Yes.
Yeah.
I've been in communication with Susan about that this week.
Okay, because I think that, because Mayor, I think you're right. I mean, the Y and a number of other organizations have been doing that training, kind of type training throughout the Low Country. And it would be great for us to be privy to it, especially the economic empowerment component.
Yeah,
And yes-
and it sounded like just their goals of what they talked about was setting metrics for economic empowerment for our region and be able to track it over, a period of time. Like I brought up the fact that really, if you look at family wealth disparities, there hadn't been a lot of change in the last 50 years. And,
Nope.
and we haven't even locally been tracking those numbers to try to move the bar in the right direction. And it sounded like they were interested in setting those kinds of metrics and tracking those numbers of individual income and family wealth and things like that, so that we try to, have something measurable that we're, making some progress on.
Yeah, I agree with you, Mayor, because when that just reflects me back to the most recent article in the Post-Inquirer that explained how Black wealth, particularly in this city, was just totally taken advantage of through highway projects and other kinds of development. And, we're at a point in our city, to me in particular, that's something I think that we really need to address and be quite intentional about it, because the kind of wealth that the African-American community, not just in this city, but across this country, has experienced through urban renewal projects, through highway projects that just went right on through very established, historically significant African-American communities throughout this city,
Right.
which has created an unbelievable wealth gap. So I agree that, the chamber and whoever else, we all need to come together and figure out how we're going to be able to address that issue.
So, and I'll just close by saying, Alvin, the young lady, Kenya Dunn,
Yes, sir.
she mentioned you by name. And again, we ought to connect with Kenya and maybe
On the committee.
Well,
Yeah.
Mr. Mayor, the good news is Kenya Dunn is on the Economic Empowerment Subcommittee.
Oh, great. Okay.
Yes.
All right. That
Yes.
connection's already made. Okay. Anyway, I don't mean to get us off the agenda, but I felt positive from their remarks today and collaboration. They're willing to work with us. So that's all good. Thank you.
Amber, it's yours.
Got it. Can we have a motion to approve the minutes from the October 6th meeting?
I move for approval.
Have a second?
Second.
Second.
I have a few amendments to the agenda, to the minutes. This is Crystal Rouse from the last meeting,
Sure.
just for record purposes. On page 3, under Youth and Education Subcommittee, Dr. Elise is spelled Elise, and it's Davis-McFarland. Also, Audrey Lane is listed as the co-chair. The only other thing from our committee that wasn't in the minutes was us moving forward with the logic model. The only other thing I had is towards the end, when we did discuss the health group, we did speak about the health initiative that DHEC and other community groups are working on, and we were able to share that information over the call. Those are the only amendments I have. And I can send that to you via email, Velvet.
Thank you.
I also have a couple, Amber, under the Housing and Mobility Subcommittee. There was a missing name. It was Matt Ajala was present. And there were 2 corrections in the first paragraph: heirs properties, not heiress. And in the second paragraph, houses, not hunters. And that was it. Thank you.
I'll move to accept the minutes as amended, approve the minutes as amended.
This is Crystal Rouse. I second.
Okay.
All in favor, say aye.
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 The ayes have it. Amber?
Aye.
So the next thing on our agenda is the procedure for reporting inappropriate external interruptions of our subcommittee meetings. We had one with one of our subcommittees during our first meeting. After meeting with Chief Reynolds, we thought it would be appropriate to let you all know that you should reach out to myself or your co-chairs immediately if there's some sort of interruption. If ever there's any feeling that you're unsafe or that you're threatened, please let us know as well so that we can reach out to Chief Reynolds and let him know, and that he can move forward in whatever way is appropriate. And that's all that I have for that. Anything from our co-chairs?
No, I think you got it.
Okay. We can now go to the.
Hey, Amber. I'm sorry, this is Crystal. I don't mean to interrupt. Quick question. With our subcommittee meetings, we have had individuals who are not listed as subcommittee members trying to log into the call. I know initially I was hesitant with letting them, actually into the room, because I know we're supposed to have it open to the public. However, there were like 2 random individuals who came on that logged in and then logged off and left some comments in the comment screen. It was nothing derogatory, but I was not sure if we're, required to, open up the waiting room and allow folks onto the Zoom call, or just make it, should we set it up in a way for it to be visible to them later?
I think that you have to open it up to the public, but you have to have control to mute if someone starts saying things that inappropriate. And that was one of the suggestions from the chiefs and deputy chief, that one way for us to be able to control it is to have the ability to mute. Have the ability to control speakers.
Councilman Gregory, this is Felice Knight. My subcommittee had trouble figuring out how to control the ability for participants to mute. And we are currently exploring the option of using a webinar format. And we have spoken with Amber Johnson about that. If that is helpful to the rest of the to the rest of the commission, then I
I'd be happy to coordinate with Amber to share that information of how to set it up as a webinar.
It'd be great to have that ability, I think.
Hey,
That gives you more control, Felice. You can mute it, Will.
Well, I haven't tried it yet. We're gonna try it for our next meeting, and everything I've researched online and on the Zoom website indicates that what happens is you have a host and a co-host, and then you admit the subcommittee members as panelists. And then you give the general public a general Zoom link that simply lets them view and listen. They can also have access to a written chat. And at some point you can unmute the attendees and let them speak if you want. But the point is the only people who are muted are the attendees, not your subcommittee members. That's my understanding of it. I see Darren has a comment.
Yeah, so I don't know if any of you remember, but back in April, that Avery was Zoom bombed during one of our events, and after a call with the Dalai Lama, the Pope, and everyone else, I come to the understanding that with the Zoom, the city will have to actually obtain that Zoom webinar functionality and basically procure that. That's a larger expense than just using the Zoom meeting aspect of it. The way that we're using Zoom right now is through Zoom meetings, and anybody who has the link to this will be able to jump into it. So if we were to move to the Zoom webinar format, the city will have to go into a contract negotiation with Zoom to become Zoom to actually obtain the Zoom webinar format of it. Now, I think it was our first meeting that we were getting ready to be bombed, and that's out of our first EIRC meeting. Once I was able to become a host, I can control exactly who was muted at one point. However, inside of the chat portion, if somebody who was trying to bomb our meeting was to go inside of the chat portion, I would not be able to delete that. Now, granted, only the people who are in on Zoom will be able to see it, and the people who are looking in on YouTube will not be able to see it yet. If the people who are in on the Zoom call would be able to see the chat portion of it. I am a big advocate of Zoom webinar, yet that, like I said, that's going to be another cost that the city has to take under, and we'll be able to use that for city council or any other meeting that they plan on using. But that is
Hey, Darren,
I'm sorry, Council. Go ahead, Council.
Darren, let me ask this question. So you're saying you did have the ability to mute. Your issue was you really didn't have any control of the chat room.
Once I was a co-host, and I believe at that meeting, Amber and I were co-hosts on that. I was able to actually hit the function of not letting anybody be able to mute, and I do that with all my meetings now for the EIRC, to where I have control of who can unmute themselves, and who can, and even with the subcommittee members, I'll have to unmute them to be able to talk.
Okay. It sounds
Chairman,
like
Chairman, we have the Resiliency and Sustainability Committee has the panel and audience. Yeah, that is the operational way that Katie McCain has been setting up that committee. So I know for sure that we have that.
Yes.
We've got that kind of Zoom. So
we have the ability to do it.
We also do whatever we do on council to allow people to, speak during citizen participation and never again. So I do think that we've got those logistics in hand. We just need to figure out how to make them available to the committees.
I think we just need a little quick training on Zoom, it sounds like to me, because I agree with you, Councilwoman Jackson. The city does have that capacity already with Zoom. So maybe we need to reach out, Felice and all other chairmen, and perhaps ask Velvet or someone from our clerk of council's office to sort of walk you guys through the process. Will that work?
I'll be open to that. Our next meeting is next week, Thursday. And as of now, we are working through the Livability and Tourism Department, whose deputy director is setting up our Zoom meetings. She has the capacity, Amy Sutherland, to do a webinar or a meeting. and she has already set up a webinar for us.
Okay.
But again, I'm open. I definitely would like to know how to do it, how to control the mute function in a meeting setting. So
Okay.
I'm open to that.
Okay, we'll talk with our clerk of counsel's office to try to make sure that they have a conversation with you guys and sort of walk you through the process. And really sorry that you guys are having this kind of issue, but when we have a commission that is as politically sensitive as this one is, we're going to have to anticipate some of what's going on and be prepared as we move forward for more of it. Amber?
So we're going to move on to our reports from our subcommittees. Darren, can you give us a report from your committee?
Sure. I would guess I guess I can say the highlight from our committee would be Councilman Appel coming on and speaking with the entire committee and the public regarding zoning and planning. We plan to actually set a meeting sometime later this week or early next week with our different staff members from this city as well as Councilman Appel about where we should really start looking. We do have a few, two of our subcommittees who are looking to partner with other subcommittees, particularly with Jerome Harris as well as in the Criminal Justice Committee. And that will be our on our end, the subgroup of the Hiring, Development, and the Training Committee, looking at the police budget as well as the police.
Could you talk a little louder for the elderly, please?
Yeah, I think
talk a little louder.
I think it's actually a problem with my sound, but I apologize.
Okay.
But we do have a subgroup on our end that's going to look to partnering with Jerome Harris as well as the Criminal Justice Committee to look at the policing side of it, and that's the subgroup of development, training, and hiring committee. They will be looking at different policies that the CPD has. But like I said in the beginning, the highlight of our last meeting would have been Councilman Appel hopping on and giving us a brief history and talk about the zoning and planning laws inside of the city and where we can actually take a further look at. And we'll be taking on a deeper look and setting up a planning meeting with our different staff members, as well as Councilman Appel. We're hoping for the next meeting that we have, which will be next week, we can have Councilman Waring come on to talk about procurement. And one thing that we plan on doing each time during our meetings, having a different councilman come on to talk about their expertise on the council. So like I said, hopefully next week we can have Councilman Waring come on and talk about procurement. And then the week after, we plan to have somebody to come on and talk about a different issue. Or a couple of weeks after, we hope to have somebody come on and talk about a different issue. That's really the biggest updates that we have. All of our subgroups on our subcommittee are doing their research right now and pulling in all the different research that we're all the different research that we're going to try to analyze over the next month.
Does anybody have any questions for Darren?
I will, but I'm going to reserve them to the end because I think a lot of this is connectivity between the subcommittees, and I think I'll just reserve mine to the end.
Okay.
If I may interject, and maybe it's just more appropriate with this subcommittee than the others, since you're dealing, Darren, with so much city staff that and I know you've got protocol. You can just request through Amber. But if you ever feel like you need any extra oomph, with city staff to be responsive about anything or whatever, don't hesitate to let me know, and I'll be happy to see if I can help. And that really applies to any of our subcommittees. Thank you.
And I think we're going to run, especially with my committee, we're going to run into that problem, particularly with procurement. issues. One thing that we did find out through the last meeting that we had was, procurement can actually go to the procurement office, or it can be set by each actual department within the city. So once we start trying to pull records for that, that's where we're gonna have the most issues, to say the least. We definitely be calling on you for that. If the procurement office don't have all the numbers that we're looking for, we're definitely going to need your help with looking at tapping into each different department to try to grab procurement numbers or so.
Understood. I just want to let you know I'll try to help if I can. And I'll be the first to acknowledge on the procurement numbers that some of what we need to do is set the protocol going forward, because some of our capturing of information over in the past has not been so good.
Thank you for that, Mayor. Can we have a report from the Youth and Education Committee, Crystal?
Yes, ma'am, sure. Good evening, everyone. The Youth and Education Committee met on October 14th, last week, Wednesday. Had a really rich, engaging conversation and follow-up to all of the items that we had discussed, and what they had for homework as well. We ended up dividing into subgroups, and the subgroups that we're dividing into are, one subgroup will be focused on restorative practices. The second will be focused on family and community engagement, which includes community and schools relationships. The third one will focus on anti-racism and equity training. And the last one will focus on culturally sustaining curriculums. What we also did was an overview of the logic model, which is what we're going to be using to put our suggestions and ideas and proposals together for recommendation. With the logic model, of course, we'll definitely make sure to include resources that we already have, resources that we need, intended results, activities that we're planning to incorporate with each one of those subheaders, what outcomes we're looking to have, impact, as well as ways to evaluate and assess implementation. Our next meeting is scheduled for next week, Wednesday, which is the 28th at 4:30. No PowerPoint today. You're lucky.
Thank you, Crystal. Does anybody have any questions for the Youth and Education Committee?
Just one question, Crystal. Will any of those subject areas that you just mentioned deal with issues as relates to deconsolidation, issues as relates to, this is just stuff for discussion. What would happen if the city of Charleston took over its own schools? Those kinds of issues, are you discussing them?
Yes, so that would actually fall under the Family and Community and the Community Relations Subcommittee. So yes, those are part of the conversation.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Okay, there's not any other questions. We will have a report from Dr. Knight for History and Culture.
Sure. Good evening again, everyone. The History and Culture Subcommittee met on October 15th, and the highlights of the meeting are particularly that our working group on historic markers, memorials, and monuments gave a report, as did all of the working groups, but their report was the one that we had the most discussion on. Thus far, that working group, which consists of Angela Mack, Vanessa Halyard, and we've also added Dr. Leisha Hendricks to that list. They have obtained an inventory of the South Carolina Department of Archives and History markers as pertains to our city. But we are encountering some difficulty acquiring an inventory from the city. We have, for city markers, not state markers. We have reached out to the Department of Cultural Affairs, Scott Watson, and Livability and Tourism, Amy Sutherland. They have been working with us and put us in contact, or sent a message, they said, to the Department of Parks and Recreation, which apparently has that information. We are in desperate need of that material in order to begin to examine what is actually on the landscape. So we hope to have that by tomorrow so that we can put that on our agenda, because our plan is to focus on the topic of markers and monuments and memorials next week. And in particular, what we are going to be examining is what is currently there and what may need to be added that we could recommend to the city to add. The issue of removal or relocation with which we were tasked is something that at this time we believe may be better served by a larger standing commission that the city of Charleston has, perhaps the Standing History Commission. But we are open to suggestions and discussions from either other subcommittees on this matter, from the co-chairs. But in 90 days, the document we have already is this big for the state, and apparently the one for the city is somewhere like this. So that's going to be challenging for us. But we are certainly going to review it and provide recommendations concerning existing markers, like maybe they might need to be redone or spoofed up or what have you, recontextualized, and then things to add to the landscape. That's our plan right now. The other thing of significance is that our working group on youth and education, we've been tasked to connect with the subcommittee on youth and education to collaborate with them. And we do have a meeting set up with Crystal Roos and her subcommittee, some members of her subcommittee, for tomorrow. Lastly, we did discuss the Mellon Foundation Monuments Project. This project was brought to our attention by Councilwoman Jackson, and several of us had heard about it independently because of our other connections. And as we examined this particular project, the information provided on the website for Mellon indicates that Mellon does not accept proposals for funding. However, in other words, they do proposals by invitation only. However, we are in the process of trying to brainstorm about ways that perhaps we can recommend that the city of Charleston elevate itself in the eyes of the third parties, if we can identify what third parties the Mellon Foundation typically uses to identify possible grantees. Because a city as historic as ours, to me, seems like a wonderful candidate to be invited to a proposal. But again, we're going to be brainstorming at our next meeting about how to best suggest that the city try to have access to, somehow find ways to get access to those funds. I believe that is it. Oh, I'm sorry. We did add, this is very important. We added a member to our subcommittee, Mr. Sean Halifax, who is the Cultural History Interpretation Coordinator for Charleston County Parks and Recreation. We had a vacancy on our committee and we added him last week. So we're very pleased to have him, and he's adding a lot already to our committee.
A couple of things, Gregory. You may also want to look at the National Park Service grants because the National Park Services may have grants that may suit what you need to do.
Thank you.
And I can't remember, Mayor Tecklenburg, The young man that was over the national parks, he retired recently. I can't remember his name, but I think he would be a great contact for you, Felice.
Oh, Michael,
Yes, yes.
Michael Allen. Michael
Talk-
Allen.
Talk to Michael. I've spoken to Michael in passing, and while he may not have the time to serve on the committee, he's willing to have a conversation. Okay, with regard
Thank
to the other thing, with respect to forming a history commission to address the status of existing monuments. I would hope that we will not just simply kick that can down the road. I know we only have 90 days to come up with recommendations or an action plan, but this commission will exist long after those 90 days. Now, I agree, Felicia, you may want to expand your reach, but I think it would be most appropriate for this commission to not necessarily take a position, but deal with some of the what ifs, okay? Because I think that is probably the hottest button issue of this commission politically. So I would just hope that your subcommittee would not just say we need to establish a commission to deal with that particular issue. I think it's appropriate for your subcommittee to deal with that issue in any way that they can, even if it's just brainstorming and making recommendations accordingly. And even if it ends up with, while this may be our position, we think that a larger body should be a part of the discussion and the decision making. But I hope that this commission would take on, those hot issues and not be hesitant to take positions, because I think that's the reason why the mayor formed this commission, because he wants to hear from us in terms of what we think. That's not necessarily what's going to happen, but at least a position from each one of these subcommittees on those highly hot political topics. If we don't, then I don't think that we are dealing with our mission, which is to eradicate the vestiges of slavery and Jim Crow. And some of those vestiges may in fact be tied into, and I'm not taking a position, I'm talking about discussion, may be tied into discussions with regard to what we may or may not want to do. And we may just expand it textually, I don't know, but I just don't want us to dismiss, that which may be extremely controversial.
Okay, thank you for your comments, Councilman Gregory. I think that puts in better context for me what is expected from this particular subcommittee. It wasn't clear to me that simply presenting ideas is enough, but I thought that we needed to have more concrete recommendations to propose, which of course then the city council would have to take up. So it is good to know that we have more latitude to present ideas as part of our recommendation. Also, as you were speaking, I remembered that several of my subcommittee members mentioned that Darren Calhoun was chair of a committee for the Charleston 350, and that group did some work. So Darren, I would love to connect with you and find out what all you did so that we don't reinvent the wheel.
And Felice, if I might add, the mayor had also commissioned a group of historians who did in fact take a position. And that,
Okay.
that position was in fact presented to council. Okay.
Okay.
So you might want to take a look at that report as well.
Okay. Did
Okay.
not know about that. Thank you.
All right.
Real quick, I did want to bring that up because yes, I am the chair of the Charleston 350 of History, Integrity, and Education Committee. For the work that's being done by Dr. Knight and the subcommittee now, I know we have not met since March, since COVID began. And
Darren, could you get a little closer to your microphone? Maybe that would help.
yeah, I don't know what's going on with my mic, but
That's better.
Steve, we have not met since March, since COVID began, the Charleston 350 of Historical Integrity and Education Committee. And for the work that Dr. Knight is doing now, I do feel as if it may be warranted to go ahead, and this is up to the mayor and Councilman Gregory, as well as I would say Jonathan Green as well, who's over the Charleston 350th, to be able to fold our committee into what Dr. Knight is doing, because yes, we've done some of this work, but it seems like they'll be able to take that torch and move it forward inside of a way that we were already doing. We've done a lot of work looking at, particularly looking at what other signage could go up inside of the city of Charleston, and not just the silver signs, which will come from the state, or even the signs that will come from Moja, or the signs that will come from the city. That will go. I know one we were talking about was on the former exchange building site inside of the city of Charleston, but putting up true interpretive signage inside to the way that the Fort Sumter Visitor Center has signage up, that has the pictures and has the true history out on different marks. So I would absolutely suggest to the councilman as well as to the mayor of folding our committee into what Dr. Knight is already doing and putting it forward, just so we can have some type of cohesiveness. Because like Councilman Gregory just said, we have technically 4 different committees right now doing the same exact thing for the city of Charleston. If I can take the work from my committee and put it somewhere else, I'm definitely down to do that.
Sounds like a plan. I'll see Jonathan by chance on Friday and glad to talk to him about it.
So just to be clear, that would simply mean transferring your files to our committee to review and utilize, and your committee would no longer exist, or we would be working together?
I would hope so. Yeah, I have all of our meeting minutes and everything of the different subgroups within our committee for the 350 that can just do, and in that way we can try to put everything that we've done all together and just move forward with just the one that I believe that can truly push something forward.
I think where Felice is, and this is where I would be if I was Felice, as long as you also send me a little help.
Right. Exactly.
Okay.
Sean was on that committee as well. Sean Halifax is definitely on the 350 committee. So
okay.
He might have been the one who mentioned it. I don't remember I got to look back at our minutes. But
Darren,
okay.
Even if we have to expand, and this will be up to the mayor, expand your committee to have more members, okay? Because
that would be essential.
You already need that. So look, let us talk about that at our next meeting, because I could see on your face.
A little overwhelmed. But no, I think that the idea is well put, because again, we do not want to reinvent the wheel. And if there's any material from the Standing History Commission that the mayor, I think it's a mayor's history commission that the mayor's office has, if there's material from them that is useful to this subcommittee, certainly I don't recommend dissolving that commission, but any collaboration across the groups that are already working within the city would be very helpful to us. So thank you.
Got it.
Dr. Knight, did you get the public art report from the interns that I told you about? Have you?
I did not. Oh, no, I actually did not. Could you remind me, please, of the fellows? I remember you in the email, you mentioned it was a city fellows. Could you remind me of the name, please?
Yeah, honestly, I don't remember the name. The mayor's
okay.
office. The mayor's
Okay.
office, would be the conduit.
Got
Scott
it.
Watson. Mayor, remember 2 summers ago, I think we hosted a group of interns who did a whole study of, in a perfect world, we would be establishing public art all over the city. And it's a great report. So I do think that
Yes.
that Dr. Knight's committee should have use of that.
Thank you for that reminder, Councilwoman Jackson.
In addition to that, the Parks Conservancy, has also been talking about public art and its placement. And we can give you, I think the best person for you to talk to in that regard would be our Director of Parks. So I will connect you with our director.
Okay.
And let you know.
That sounds great.
Overall, where the city is with respect to public art.
Thank you very much.
There are no other questions for Dr. Knight. Our Criminal Justice Committee, Mr. Harris, can you give us a report?
Certainly. Criminal Justice Committee met yesterday. We are still a committee of 6. We're waiting to connect with Austin Bennett to join our membership. The primary focus of our meeting, our second meeting, was to prioritize our activities. We've developed 3 working subgroups. One on a review of the implementation of the racial bias audit, which will be led by our chair, Michael Better, and assisted by Eric Watson, and I'll participate in that subcommittee as well. Review of ordinances that have disproportionate impact, racial impact, and questions of accountability, police accountability, and recommendations for improvement. So the review of a deep dive into the ordinances that are is indicated in the framework will be undertaken, led by Ali Menegakis and Arthur McFarland, with Colleen Condon working as part of that group. And the final area will be a review of racial bias assessment of the courts. Arthur and Ali will take the lead in that area. We also noted a number of areas, and Councilwoman Jackson pointed this out. There's intersectionality, as has been discussed by other subcommittees. So when we look at the area of reentry, there is perhaps interface with the Economic Development Committee in the area of jobs, in the area of housing, similarly in terms of reentry. And we already mentioned it was already mentioned that the internal review group, which is looking at police recruitment, training, and promotion, there's some intersectionality there. We anticipate there also perhaps being some intersectionality in the area of youth as it relates to activity. We also noted that we need to figure out a way to interface with the Community Police Advisory Committee and its subcommittees that are looking at aspects of the racial bias audit, and to figure out what the continuity will be in terms of getting that information, as well as interfacing with the Public Safety Committee. We noted that the after action report was presented to the Public Safety Committee. There's a hearing. The Public Safety Committee is going to take public input. It's our intent to listen in on that to see if there are any items that we should incorporate. Our next meeting will be scheduled on November 9th. In the interim, the subcommittees will be meeting to develop more focused activities. So their work group reports will be on the agenda. Dr. Bernie Powers will provide us a historical context for policing and criminal justice in the city of Charleston. And Wendy Shriver will present an update in terms of audit implementation, focused on those areas that are most of concern to the committee members. There one other thing that was discussed or recommended. There's a documentary called Driving While Black, a PBS documentary. It covers historical relationship of mobility with racism, with slavery, development of automobiles, housing, economic development, and brings it and then interfaces and intersects with criminal justice reform. Our committee is recommending that we look at it, and I've seen it, and I would recommend perhaps that we add that to the resource base for the entire commission because it raises some interesting questions that might impact the work of other commissions.
Harrstrom, the only thing you gave a great report from what I listened in last night, but I thought that the commission or the committee had decided to move its next meeting forward to October 26th. We couldn't do it on the 2nd of November, so that was my takeaway, that we were going to.
No, the group, my notes and the minutes that Ali says is that we're going to meet on the 9th. In the interim, the subcommittees will be meeting to make some substantive work.
Hey, Jerome, this is Dudley. Thanks for participating. Just a couple of questions, because it seems as though a lot of what the committee will be doing will be city specific. And I'm wondering if the committee will expand to dealing with issues such as ban the box, bond reform, which I understand that the city does not necessarily have a control over, but your committee could make recommendations to city council to perhaps do a resolution in support of some of these issues that we may not have control over. And then lastly, as we deal with criminal justice, how do we deal with it on the preventive level? We all know that by 3rd grade, it's known exactly how many jails we may have. And what I'm getting at is, do we go to a level where we're going to now deal with parenting issues that will help to prevent a 3rd grader to be labeled and eventually we know get into the criminal justice system? I'm just wondering if you're going to expand. No, 90 days is not a long time, but we will be going beyond the 90-day. But I would just like to see when we deal with criminal justice reform, that we attempt to also go as close as we can to prevention, and that prevention may have to start much earlier. It may even have to start prenatally by having parenting classes. I can go on and on, but I think you get my drift. I mean, I'd just like to see us, don't be too narrow, or any of our committees on our focus, that we can go outside of the city. We're going to have to deal with county issues, as you know, state issues, as we know. So I'm just looking to make sure that what I think the mayor's intent is for this commission is addressed. And I think that some of the things that are outside the control of the city is not necessarily something that we should not undertake.
And I agree. This is Crystal with everything that you're saying, Councilman Dudley. And what I thought about when you mentioned that in talking about the cradle to prison pipeline, and also as it pertains to parenting, is the two subcommittees that we have that are working on restorative practices and family and community engagement with, of course, communication and intersectionalities with the city, community organizations, and the school district. So, Mr. Harris, I would love to connect with you so that we can figure out how to best collaborate around that.
Sure. So I just want to remind you people that Michael Better is the chair of the committee. I am the vice chair of the committee.
Right. Got you covered.
No, in response to Councilman Gregory's point, had I been engaged or involved, I probably would have called this committee violence, public safety, violence reduction, and criminal justice reform to capture the interface and the questions of policy, bandit box policies and things of that nature that might have an effect on reducing the ultimate impact on public safety. I think we can begin to open that door, and as we interface with the other task force, we can kind of address that. Well, part of the reason that we added the courts as part of it was that it is the criminal justice system, all right? And when you talk about bonding and diversion programs and things of that nature, particularly for youth, to prevent them from getting records and jackets that impact them for the rest of their lives. So some of that will come in, and we will definitely take that back in our discussions to see how we can at least perhaps frame the next level of work that may need to be done in that area. But thank you.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Okay, let's move on to the Economic Empowerment Group. Alvin, can you give us a report?
Yes, I can. Thanks, Amber. The Economic Empowerment Group, we met last Friday, October 16th. So we realized that most of our, conversation was focused around business. So we kind of, dove into that just a little bit deeper. And as a result, we came up with 4 focus groups that are going to be focused on improving government contracting and spending protocol, retaining and enhancing existing businesses. That's where Kenya will be involved. So basically just, talking about getting businesses in contact with the CRDA, getting prepared for the Metro Chamber, just basically just taking that business to the next level, reducing barriers to opening a new business, and improving access to capital. Of course, these can grow, as we start to focus on things outside of business. But just really thinking about, and we went down, this alley as well, just thinking about economic opportunity. You can't talk about that unless you talk about money and having money and acquiring money. So we're trying to think of some outside of the box ideas. And one of those ideas was we wanted to talk about establishing some type of trust fund, right? A trust fund for not just Black-owned businesses, but Black Charleston in general. Of course, some of the challenges are, where do you get the money from, right? So a couple of ideas that we came across was, having the city put in a certain percentage of their internal revenues into this fund. Something else that we talked about was basically the city hiring a full-time grant writer, and that individual's sole purpose in life is just to go out there and find money to put into this fund. And the good thing about that is that, person would, pretty much pay their salary, right? So as they're finding grants, a certain percentage of the grants will go towards paying their salary. So there wouldn't necessarily be any additional burden on the city financially. And also you can fundraise, right? I mean, you can have a gala every year. You can invite the who's who of Charleston, anybody. You can just basically fundraise money to be able to go to this fund. When we're talking about a percentage of the city's revenue, The number that we came up with was basically a 1-for-1. So right now the city is around 22% Black. So we were talking about basically putting 22% of the city's revenue into this fund for Black Charleston. Councilwoman Jackson brought up the fact that the city doesn't necessarily control all of its tax revenue, or at least what they can do with it. So I would add the qualifier to basically whatever eligible revenue, right? Whatever the city has control over, those are the funds that we kind of sort of work with. Now, understanding that I also work for the City of Charleston Stormwater Management Program, and knowing that everybody's looking for money, kind of shooting myself in the foot, right? Because we still need to find some money to solve our flooding issues. But at the end of the day, I just think that it just needs to be known that we can't have this conversation without talking about money, and we have to find money. Something else that we talked about was basically incentivizing Black businesses, not just existing businesses, but businesses that want to come to the city of Charleston. And a way you could do that is, you just kind of sort of think Boeing, you think Google, right? Whatever cities, Amazon, cities offer different, tax incentives and abatements, for these businesses to basically come to their cities. So that was, just thinking outside the box again, right? How do we create Black businesses and how do we sustain Black businesses? And one way to do so is to release some of that, financial burden that, comes along with having just to operate in the city of Charleston. It's really expensive. And there really aren't that many Black businesses down in the city of Charleston. So in terms of, an impact on the city's revenue from Black businesses, it really wouldn't be that much of a adverse impact. And another area that we dove into was the city's MWBE department. We're talking about how you basically have to have 2 years of tax returns in order for you to be eligible. And if you're a city if you're a business just starting out, then if you're day one, then you have to be able to sustain yourself for 2 years without even being able to take advantage of that of the certification that comes from the city. And it also goes for Charleston County and also for the SCDOT as well. So just understanding, also having operated a business myself, if you don't have the certification, then businesses companies aren't going to use you, right? If you don't help them check the box, then they're not going to put you on the team. That's just how it works most of the time. So future meetings, we're looking at bringing in the city's legal and finance to basically see what's legal and what we can do. We're looking to meet with the MBE advisory board and go through their spin report. And then also, like I said earlier, our last meeting was mostly focused on business, but we will be looking to expand outside of business as well. But just if we focus on that fund, then that fund not only assists Black-owned businesses, but it could be there to assist Black Charleston. You could think housing, you could think education, transportation, things of that nature. So we just really, was thinking about, we got to figure out how do we get the money. Also, I didn't want this 90 days to go by without the record showing that the Economic Empowerment Subcommittee didn't ask for the money. So
just a couple of things, Alvin. Thanks for all of what you do. Sounds like you're talking about a bank, okay? I mean, and if we're talking about establishing an African American bank, then that's what it is. But we do have an African American financial institution in our city that's been here for a while. And if every African American in this city, okay, puts $100, $2,000, or whatever in that bank, build that bank's portfolio, okay? Not depending on the city, we can depend on the city to make sure that the city makes deposits in that financial institution. And I think the city is already doing that. But I do think that, another idea to consider, if we want to start getting capital together, is we already know that we have a legitimate financial institution. And perhaps what we need to do is to start talking to not just African Americans, but people in the city, especially our churches, okay, to start making huge deposits in that financial institution, giving that financial institutions to do many of the things that you're talking about right now, as opposed to perhaps maybe reinventing the wheel, so to speak. And I'd also like to hear economic empowerment as it relates to the individual, because I do think that there are things that we can do for the individual, especially starting very young with just financial literacy programs, our curriculums in our schools, teaching our children at a very, very young age how to manage money, how to invest money, and so forth. And to look at how our wealth has been stripped, and our wealth is continually being stripped. And our wealth is being stripped because in many cases there are different policies in the banking community for us than it is for other people. That's stripping our wealth, that's stripping our economic prosperity. And finally, make sure that these banks carry out their CRA responsibilities to invest in minority neighborhoods, to invest to foster economic development. So I'm with you on the business side, but I'm also thinking, and it's going to cross housing and many of the other things that we're talking about. But when I think of the individual and how we are continually being robbed through predatory lending practices, not just on housing, but across the board. If we can attack some of those predatory lending issues, we would keep more money in the pockets of poor people within our city, because when they're paying 30 and 40% interest rates on car loans and everything else, they're being stripped of their wealth. So for me, when I think of economic empowerment, okay, I'm not just thinking economic empowerment in terms of the businesses, but how do we empower the individual to make sure that they're not continually being ripped off, okay, with a lot of these predatory lending loans. And I think that teaching financial literacy at a very, very early age, okay, is a way, again, for us to ensure that our future generations have a clear understanding of how to go about creating wealth. Those are just some thoughts, and I'll just participate in your next meeting, Al.
Please do, please do. I mean, yeah, I like totally get it. My thing is, I mean, we can be financially literate, we can have all those things, right? But if we don't have anything to we don't have money at the end of the day, you're just, you gotta solve the money issue. And then I don't think that the onus should necessarily fall solely on the Black community, because we know how we got here. We're in the city of Charleston, right? We know how we got here. So it's going to take a little bit of everybody in order for us to solve the problem, which is why I was kind of sort of focusing on, maybe we look at I'm getting some feedback in my headphones. Just being able to capture capital basically from like everybody. I mean, we talk about we're Charleston strong, and we want to kumbaya, march to the top of the bridge and all that stuff, but it's time to move from the symbolic, symbolism to actual systemic and structural change, and that's going to take money.
Yeah, Alvin, well then why not challenge the citizens of Charleston, South Carolina to put $50 million in the African American bank. I mean, I'm just saying, I agree with you. Without capital, we're not going to do anything, okay? But if we've got our money in Bank America, we've got our money everywhere, okay, but in a place that would, at a minimum,
Understood.
yes, okay.
And I actually brought that up. I actually brought that up at our second meeting. Really want to dive into who we're banking with. I think that's Wells Fargo, if I'm not mistaken. And I think I mentioned this on last call, but basically, the city of Charleston shouldn't want to bank with somebody that doesn't want to bank with their citizens. So if you want to talk about having a huge impact in dictating behavior, I don't know what the city of Charleston's bank account balance looks like, but if you threaten to pull that out of that particular bank and move it elsewhere, you could kind of sort of dictate behavior of that local bank.
And council has had some of those discussions, and I think that you should invite somebody like Councilman Waring to your meeting, because that's something that he's been talking about for quite some time. But I still say we have to make sure that when a dollar is in our community, that dollar just doesn't go out. That dollar has to stay in that community 10, 15, 20, 30 times, okay? I mean, that's the way we can foster wealth in our community. And then a lot of times we say we don't have the capital, and we do. Many African Americans own a lot, not a lot, but own a considerable amount of land in this area. That's capital. We need to teach our people that when they say they don't have money, that they do have money, okay? They have equity in their property and in their land, and we need to teach our people how to leverage through development of housing or whatever, strip mall, whatever. Teach them how to take that land and that money, okay, and leverage it in to creating wealth for them and for future generations. But I'll be at the next meeting.
We'll meet Friday at 1:00.
Okay, I'll make sure I'm on the call.
Okay. Thank you. I appreciate it.
Thank you.
Councilman Sackman, I think you had your hand up. My apologies.
No. I've been listening, and I was going to wait till the end, but it's now 6:41. Anyway, I think we have Tracy's housing and mobility still to report out. I just wanted to say, Elvin, I agree 100%. And the thing I was going to interject with was twofold. One, about the capital and how to continue this effort and sustain this. I do think it's going to require us to invest in having an individual that's working either with Amber, identifying private sources, identifying that grant money. There's money out there. And when I look across the region at the corporations that come here, and oftentimes come here, I want to say rent-free, but at a very reduced tax base, we need to approach them and make sure that they're investing in our communities, and they do. I do know that Boeing and some of these big corporations invest in education. They should be investing in these type of efforts like we're talking about. But I do think it's going to require us to make a decision about how to sustain this group and this effort. I do think we need to have someone that's waking up every day and thinking about how to write those grants, how to attract private foundation money, how to reach out to corporate donors. And I would challenge you, Elvin, and everyone else, when we talk about pots of money that we're tapping into, the city has a finite tax base. I would encourage us to think about where the ATAX dollars goes and the hospitality tax dollars goes at the state level. That is where the money comes in, Elvin, where we need to really rethink and advocate for a change. And I'm not just talking about Black businesses. I'm talking about small business owners in Charleston all over the place. White, Black, brown, we all feel the same pinch that we're getting from giving out tax dollars on accommodations and hospitality and wondering where that money goes. For example, when we hit COVID in April, wouldn't it have been nice to have $4 or $5 million set aside from the ATAX dollars to help fund some small business owners that were suffering, not back on their rent, being able to get through the past couple months? I think that's the advocacy that we need. I think for me, that's where we need to focus our efforts. The city's finite, and I know Mayor Tech we're gonna do what we can as a council and as a city to help, but I really think we need to look to Councilman Gregory's point, outside the region, and really have someone that's advocating for systemic changes, in my opinion, at the state level. As a business owner, I don't see the value of my A-tax and H-tax dollars. So,
Councilman Saccharin, real quick.
Yeah.
To everything you were just saying, I say we should go ahead and just fund Amber's department and.
But that's going to take advocacy and lobbying on our part to get it done, and we need someone that thinks about that. So I just don't want us to be fighting over a small piece of the pie when we really need to think about how do we increase the pie for everybody.
Exactly. Everything you said could fall under her department, and that can be right there. So just going to toss that little nugget out there.
Thanks, Darren.
Thank you.
Can we have a report from Tracy for housing and mobility?
Good evening. It started afternoon, but now I'm on my porch and it's dark. Sorry. Yeah, the Housing and Mobility Subcommittee met on October 15th. And in our previous, that was our second meeting. And in our first meeting, we had identified 5 areas that we wanted to work on and focus on. They were the BAR jurisdiction north of the crosstown, mobility and transit, fair housing ordinance, RAD, and evictions and foreclosures. And in our last meeting, we really focused primarily on the BAR north of the crosstown. Councilmember Saccharin and Gregory had received a letter that they forwarded to me from a group of homeowners in that area with concerns about BAR jurisdiction. And so we had several of the folks living in that community. We had the president of the West Side Neighborhood Association. We had Councilmember Appel, and we had a good discussion with some examples of how the BAR is affecting homeowners in that area. One example was of a young woman who purchased a home in Ragsboro, and it was a brick split level home. They had pictures, and she had to replace 32 windows, and she had budgeted to replace those windows with wood replicas, exact replicas, and did not understand that she was in the BAR jurisdiction, because the BAR jurisdiction it refers to demolition, and she wasn't planning to demolish the house, so she didn't think they would have oversight. But when she pulled her permit, she realized that they did, and by pulling the windows out, that was considered demolition. And so it added $40,000 to her budget, and she ended up having to refurbish them herself with a friend, and they're put back together. But she said, I don't know if they'll withstand a hurricane, and they're certainly not sustainable as far as my utility bills. So that was an example of a young professional with a good salary dealing with this issue. But we know there are a lot of minority, low-income homeowners that are dealing with this issue that oftentimes can't afford to do any repairs, much less refurbish windows and that kind of thing. So we have a working committee that is going to be reaching out with the city BAR staff, the neighborhood groups, the heirs property groups, and we're looking at how can we come up with some recommendations that can ease this for families and help them make repairs, including coming up with money to help supplement the money that the city has. I talked with Eddie Bynes, and he said the city has about $80,000 per house if they meet their requirements. How can we find another funding source to do that? And another idea was also, when you talk about economic development, I remember meeting on the east side when we were talking about the Archer School in the beginning, and one of their complaints were that there were a lot of tradesmen and they can't get construction jobs because they can't bond, they don't have the right insurance. How do we create jobs through this for folks that are living in the neighborhood? And so we're looking at this issue, and we'll plan to move forward after we put our recommendations on the table at our next meeting next Thursday. Councilmember Appel gave a nice presentation and walked us through what the process would be. We understand that, this with the historic preservation groups, we will have to, find good compromises here, but he suggested that we bring it first to CD committee. And so that is our plan. So we will be doing that next week. We also have a working group looking at the mobility and transit that we'll be presenting to our group next week. Keith Benjamin was on the call. We talked a little bit, some recommendations that he has and some things that are going on in other cities, and they will be bringing that to us next week at our Thursday meeting on the 29th. Thank you.
Any additional questions?
It's me again. We're still going to focus on the discriminatory aspects of housing, and I think I owed you a copy of the fair housing ordinance that didn't pass council, that your committee wanted to look at to see whether or not you want to recommend reintroducing that. Because in this climate right now, as you know, with evictions up, foreclosures may go up, discrimination is going to be rampant in our city and in our region. And it would be great if the city was to establish a FAP through passing an ordinance substantially equivalent to the national law, so that we don't have to go through the Human Rights Commission or anybody else. We can, in fact, do our own investigations and determine whether or not discrimination is occurring. I just think that it's important for the city, particularly this commission, if there are policies out there that we can use to help us along. Luckily, the Supreme Court is going to help a bit with the evictions, but still, the folks that are being evicted are still going to need, as we all know, will need some type of assistance. And I definitely still think that if we do the fair housing piece, we get into the fair lending piece, which would affect the economic empowerment committee. So again, I think that we need to look at these banks and these bank policies, but the city can't do it because the city is not a FAP and doesn't have the authority or the power to do it, even though it has a fair housing law on the books. And finally, I know that there's a person, I think on Darren's committee, who has an expertise in zoning. In fact, what she did was a study of zoning in North Charleston to deal with affordability, deal with zoning laws that might restrict the city from being able to make certain areas affordable, et cetera, et cetera. I think at some point we need to pair with her and to even pair with Darren's committee as they go through the zoning policies of the cities, which may not incentivize the development of affordable housing. So I just put that forth because we did talk in our the first meeting, Tracy, about the importance of zoning. And I do think that if we can pull, I think is her name Chloe, Darren? I can't remember her name, but she's with the city. She's city staff, and she's supposed to be giving us technical assistance. But I think that we should connect with her and sort of find out what she did in North Charleston, and maybe the housing committee or even the internal committee may want to recommend that the same kind of zoning study be done in the city of Charleston, particularly since we have the expertise on staff.
It's Chloe Stuber, council member. She
Yeah.
currently works for the planning department, but she did her graduate internship with the housing department here.
Yeah, yeah,
Chloe Stuber.
yeah. So I think that we need to connect with her in some way. And I'll shut up.
Thank you. Yeah, that's okay. I want to answer you, Councilmember Gregory. Yes, we did talk about the fair housing, and actually, I would like to commend the city staff that is working with me. Matt Ojala and Andrea Jones have been really great at pulling information. And actually, just today, I was reading the city council notes from the Fair Housing 2010, A Time to Act, and your arguments for that back in 2010, and that is certainly still on our agenda. And I didn't report as much into that simply because we had focused so hard on this BAR issue for this meeting. We're also, as far as the zoning, we are looking at, and I certainly want to work with Darren and his group. One of the things we're looking at, and we discussed in our first meeting, is the potential to help facilitate and expedite RAD development by helping Don and the Housing Authority with looking at the zoning of their properties and coming up with an overall plan. I actually already have a plan because we've been doing a lot of work on the east side that Design Works had done for the whole east side, showing rezonings that could really help with those RAD properties and really pull that whole east side together. So that is all still very much on our agenda, and we will be moving forward with those. But I apologize if I didn't address that enough, but we did in this particular meeting feel that if we could look at some of these requirements of the BAR, that's something we could get moving fairly quickly to and bring something to CD committee to help relieve some of the stress in those neighborhoods.
And by the way, we tend not to refer to the crosstown as the crosstown. It's the Septima Parkway, just to try to again
Thank you.
reinforce that, this woman, blah, blah, you know the history. So we try to, since I've been on council,
Yes.
I tend to tell anyone that says crosstown that it's the Septima Clark Parkway.
Absolutely. And real quick,
Thank you.
I do want to give a shout out to Penny Ashby and Mandy Herring, who will be invaluable to our committee, just with their institutional knowledge. As a historian, we always like to look at institutional knowledge and what they can bring to our committee. So I'm absolutely looking forward to what Penny and Mandy can bring to our committee and to the commission and whole. So we'll be meeting with them very, very, very soon. And Tracy, I'll definitely bring you in on that as well.
Mr. Chairman.
Yes,
Hey.
Mayor.
I hate to be a party pooper, but I need to sign off. And I just want to let y'all know how uplifted I feel hearing the breadth of these discussions and proposals going forward. It's really remarkable. And I want to thank each one of you for your service and all the time you're putting in already and over the next couple of months. This is really terrific, great work. And I look forward to seeing y'all soon. I'm going to try to pop into everybody's subcommittee meeting, at least for a portion sometime soon, and see you when we get back together. Thank y'all so much.
Thank you, Mayor. Have a good evening.
All right, thank you, Mr. Mayor.
So if we don't have any other questions, I'm going to move on to our next steps. I think next week, October 28th, Youth and Education has a meeting at 4:30. Internal Review has a meeting that same day at 6 o'clock. October 29th, History and Culture has a meeting at 5:30. Housing and Mobility has a meeting that same day at 6 o'clock. Friday, October 30th, Economic Empowerment will be meeting at 1 o'clock. And November 9th, Criminal Justice Reform will have their meeting at 6 o'clock.
Amber, I'd just like to, I'm sorry, Chairman Saccharin?
Yeah, just a quick question. All this is getting posted on the weekly notice that goes out through Jennifer's office, right?
Yes.
Right. Just wanted to make sure. Thank you.
Yes, I just wanted to say to everybody on this call, thank you. But dare to rustle feathers. If we don't rustle any feathers, folks, we are not being effective. Okay? We can't push the status quo. That's not what this is about. Okay? Let's let folks know that we're here and that we are here to deal with the vestiges of slavery and Jim Crow. Let's make it simple. And let's just see what systemically is there that we need to remove, okay? Dare to rustle the feathers. And like Darren says, let's be intentional, okay? And intentional means making a choice and clearly understanding the consequences of those choices. So let's be intentional. Let's rustle some feathers, folks. Y'all have a good evening.
Thanks, co-chair.
Co-chairs, Amber, could I just ask, where are we with the Health and Welfare Committee? I don't see them on the list.
And I think that's a fair question. I've been in communication with the chairman, David Rivers, who has sent in a 5 or 6 page outline of which we should share with everybody on this call at this point, if we haven't, of the direction that he wants to take his committee. However, I am a bit concerned that the collective has not met yet, so that we can have a cross-fertilization of ideas and voices on that committee. So I will have a discussion with David this week. I think that's a relevant question, Carol, and thanks for asking it.
Yeah, I'm collecting articles.
Okay. Yeah, you're like me. I do the same thing, Carol. I still tear them out of the paper and put them aside. But if
My
there's
husband doesn't like the piles, so I try not to.
well, if there's nothing else to come before this committee, everybody have a great evening. This meeting's adjourned.
I say.
Thank you all.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Call you tomorrow.